Hey everyone, welcome to the Road to Resurrection. I'm so excited that you've been on this journey with us each day as we're walking through the Gospel of Matthew, looking at the major events, some of the major events in the final week of the life of Jesus as we inch closer and closer to Good Friday and ultimately to Easter Sunday. Now yesterday when we left off, Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he had spent a season of prayer in preparation and in surrender, as Thursday night is the eve before crucifixion. And the passage we're going to look at today takes up immediately there in the garden. And I want you to notice something as we read through this, and I want to rehearse for you the events of Thursday night leading up to Friday morning, because for a lot of us, that's sort of a whirlwind of events. We don't really understand what all happened. We just know it was really chaotic, and it was very underhanded, and there were all these trials. I'm going to see if I can explain it to you in a way that it all makes sense and you have an understanding of what Jesus went through from his arrest to his crucifixion. And as you do, I want you to think about how it seems like all manner of evil is being unleashed and is rising up against Jesus. We see it throughout his ministry with this level of demonic and evil activity, this intensity of evil and dark activity that's unlike anything else in history. And it's as if evil knows that the victory of the cross is approaching and the gates have been unleashed. And so we have local political leaders coming against Jesus. We have the national religious leaders coming against Jesus. We have the betrayal by Judas. We have the forsakenness by Peter. We have the abandonment by all the apostles. And it seems like all of these things, it's just a tsunami that comes against Jesus. Anything that would undermine and circumvent what's going to happen on Good Friday and ultimately on Easter Sunday. So in Matthew chapter 26, we read of the arrest this way, that while he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, arrived, and with him a large crowd with swords and clubs sent from the chief priest and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The man that I kiss, arrest him. He is the man. And going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Greetings, Rabbi," and kissed him. And Jesus replied, "Friend, do what you came for." And at that moment, Jesus is arrested. Now it's late Thursday night, and the political leaders and the religious leaders know that nothing can be done until morning. And so Jesus is taken immediately to the home of Annas. Annas is the former high priest. He represents old religious power. He represents the grassroots movement among the religious leaders who want to overturn and do away with Jesus and his ministry. And so they spend the night torturing Jesus and playing games and mocking him, waiting for daybreak, because when the day begins to break, the gears can begin to move and they can officially and finally do away with Jesus of Nazareth. And so the first thing they do is they have what we call what I might call a religious trial. Now, there's 4 trials during these hours, and it's very chaotic. There's a religious trial, and then there's 3 political trials. And the first religious trial takes place at the home of the high priest Caiaphas. They want to elicit a death sentence for Jesus. The problem is he won't cooperate. And so they bring all types of accusations. They try to manipulate a confession out of him. Tell us, are you the Son of God? But Jesus will not answer. He stands silent. And then they bring in false witnesses. And Matthew and Mark tell us that the false witnesses couldn't get their testimonies to agree. And then finally they strike pay dirt. Finally they get the accusation that they need as they bring people in who say, "We heard him say that he was going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days." As if Jesus was some sort of a terrorist, but that's what they needed. Now they can charge him with blasphemy. And the high priest makes this big show, and he tears his clothes, and he says, "What more do we need?" The problem is, these are religious leaders. They have no political authority. They have no authority to carry out an execution. They need a political conviction. And so now Jesus is taken to what we might call political trial number 1. And he's taken to Pilate, who's the Roman governor of Judea. And Pilate examines Jesus, and he is adamant that this man has done nothing wrong. See, Pilate is in an odd position here because he really doesn't care what's going on among these religious people. His job as the Roman governor is to make sure that peace is kept, to make sure that people pay their taxes, there's no uprisings, there's no riots, there's no problems. Just keep the money flowing for Rome. And so now he has all these people in a frenzy, and his job is to step on any uprising like you would step on a roach and make sure that everybody hears the crackle under your feet. But he's adamant. Jesus is innocent. He's not leading a rebellion. He doesn't even have any followers. He's all by himself. So he intends to release Jesus. He says, "I'll punish him and then release him, but he's innocent." But that's the way Rome did things. He's innocent, but we'll punish him. And that's when they make the remark that Jesus is from Galilee. And Pilate realizes, wait a second, I don't rule over Galilee. That's Herod. And Pilate sees an out, and he says he needs to be in front of Herod, not me. And so he sends Jesus to Herod for political trial number 2. Herod is in town for Passover. So they bring Jesus to Herod the Tetrarch. Now, Herod is the one who put John the Baptist to death. And he's heard about Jesus. He knows Jesus' reputation, and he wants Jesus to entertain him. He asks him to do some miracles for him. And when Jesus refuses, he sort of cleans his hands and sends him back to Pilate as if to say, this is a waste of my time. And so he's sent back to Pilate, and now we have the third political trial. Jesus comes before Pilate, and Pilate insists that Jesus is innocent, and he's going to release him. But the riot, the people begin to work up into a frenzy, and even though he's going to release Jesus, Luke tells us that the voice of the people prevailed. Now Pilate understands that he's got a real problem here, and so he has an idea. You see, it was a custom for the Roman governor to release a prisoner every year at the Passover, to release a Jewish prisoner every year at the Passover, a sign of goodwill. And Pilate offers the people a choice. I can release to you this man Barabbas, who is an insurrectionist and a murderer, or I can release to you Jesus. And the people, with a loud voice, with one voice, they call for the release of Barabbas. Release to us Barabbas, who's an insurrectionist, the very thing that they're charging Jesus with. And then he asks the people, the chief priest and the leaders, what do you want me to do with Jesus? And they say, crucify him, crucify him. And so Barabbas goes free, and Jesus, the Son of God, will be crucified. And there's a powerful truth in there. A man known to be guilty is released in the place of a man known to be innocent. That's the gospel. That's the Easter story. You see, in a very real way, Barabbas represents all of us. So Jesus is then turned over to a Roman cohort, that's about 500 soldiers, to be beaten and to be crucified. And when a criminal was tortured and beaten, they would typically have their hands tied to a post or to a pillar, and then an expert in Roman torture would take what's called a scorpion, which is a whip with multiple strips of bone and lead and bronze, anything that could tear flesh. And they would perform the beating, and depending on how long they wanted the victim to suffer on the cross would determine how long they were beaten. And evidently, Jesus was beaten pretty severely because he did not last very long on the cross, just a few hours, where other people might last several days. And so, with a bit of melancholy, and on this somber note, Jesus has been arrested, he's been convicted, he's been handed over, and now he's been beaten. And so we're left with sort of a heavy spirit over the next couple of days to think about what all this means, what it signifies. And certainly I think we begin to understand the depth of our sinfulness. If the Son of God, the innocent Son of God, would be condemned, how deep must our sin be? But it also causes us to recognize what must be the magnitude of God's love for him to step in and endure all of this, all of these things, so that God's world might be put back together again, including putting you and me back together again. Be blessed on this Thursday, and we'll see you tomorrow as we look at the victory of the crucifixion.